everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Logistics with Purpose. I'm Kristi Porter with Vector Global Logistics, and today I am delighted to introduce you to Wanona Satcher, CEO and founder of Mākhers Studio. So, hey, Wanona, it's so good to see you.
Same, Kristi. I'm excited about our chat today. Good to see
Me
you
too.
again.
You too. I am a longtime fan, so as I said, I'm excited to create more fans and hear more about you and what you've been up to. For everyone who doesn't yet follow her on LinkedIn, you definitely need to do that to stay up to date with them. But before we get into Mākhers Studio, which has a lot of incredible projects and visions for the future and everything, I want us to share and talk a little bit more about your background. This is something I don't know, so I'm excited to learn. So tell us, first of all, where you grew up. What was your childhood like?
Yeah, so I grew up, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where we are headquartered now. And for generations upon generations from here. And very interesting childhood in the sense of being from the city, but then moving out, like a lot of families, during the late 80s and early 90s, specifically Black families, to the suburbs, and then ended up moving back to, um, well, actually moving to the suburbs on the east side. We
Yeah.
originally moved from the suburbs to the south, and the east side was interesting because that was my first, I would say, interaction with a huge international student population, which had a huge impact on why we do what we do, why I do what I do now at Mākhers Studio, and just delving into different types of foods and languages, and more of the inclusion and diversity opportunities at the beginning, at the early onset of middle school and high school. And during that time, also, because even though I lived in the same county, there was an opportunity to take courses at a better high school. So schools in the neighborhood that I lived in weren't that great, which was highly unfortunate. But we were able to, those of us who wanted to look at the opportunities for better programs and better classes, we ended up having to take two buses to get to school and two buses to get home. So I was part of the end, well, almost the end of the busing system that was established during later parts of Jim Crow for integrating schools. So, while that provided opportunity, at the same time, we shouldn't have had to do that, right? Like the opportunity should have been in our community. So that definitely had a huge impact on why, I do what I do now. But before that, I started, you know, drawing and building. I, I didn't know what I was doing at that time, but looking back on it, building, cities and neighborhoods with crayons and all kinds of things for hours on the floor. And of course, now looking back, that's what I do now in a sense, right? That's almost a portion of that. So, very, very cool childhood, very fun. It's a very, interesting, diverse, inclusive, and all of that has definitely had an impact to what I do today, for what I do today. And then after high school, I ended up attending Auburn University, College of Architecture, Design, and Construction for undergrad and grad, and ended up graduating a dual degree in landscape architecture and city planning. And then, like most students, and went to work right after that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. It is getting more and more rare to meet a native Atlanta that is still here.
Yes,
So
that's what I've heard.
yes,
Yeah.
so that is you. Yeah, and most people I talk to have, of course, flown through Atlanta. Our airport is the world's busiest airport, but you are also talking about our wonderful diversity.
Yes.
Atlanta is an amazing, amazing city for food, for culture, just to meet and see the intersection of people. So yeah, tell me a little bit more, if you would, about that aspect and kind of how that opened your eyes to just what else is out there, but it was right there at home as well.
Yeah, that's true, and that's the beautiful piece to what I call old Atlanta. A very interesting culmination of, having my grandparents and parents active in, especially my grandparents in civil rights movement and participating heavily with Dr. Martin Luther King and Ralph David Abernathy and a lot of other, civil rights activists that we all know. I hope that we all know.
Yeah.
And so that was obviously a big part of growing up in Atlanta and what that meant for the city and for actually the country and the world. And a lot of that started here, right here in our city.
Yeah.
And then, of course, growing up during the time of when the Olympics came in '96, but the preparation for the Olympics, a lot of that was not positive for a lot of people. So a lot of people were displaced, pushed out because of the overwhelming teardowns of the public housing, a lot of public housing. In fact, Atlanta had one of the largest, as far as a city, amounts of public housing in any city in the United States.
Oh, I didn't
And
know
so
that.
all of that, especially Techwood homes, a lot of public housing was torn down in preparation for um, the Olympics. And of course, the majority of those individuals did not come back for a
Right.
lot of reasons. And especially a lot of promises were not made. And that story needs to be told more. But that had a huge impact on the question in my mind about equity and housing and inclusivity and community development and affordable housing is specific to housing. But so we had the civil rights piece.
Another great topic for today.
A whole nother, yeah, that's right. That
It's
definitely will
wild
lead
out
into
there.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's so and so it's, we've seen this before, but now it is affecting a lot more people.
Yeah.
And that has been before it was predominantly Black and Brown communities. Now you're starting to see it's not just Black and Brown communities, so there's a larger conversation around that.
Mhm.
But so the pre-civil rights component and learning and being reared in that kind of space to seeing being old enough to almost understand or at least question what was happening during the mid '90s in the Olympics,
Yeah.
and then after that the so the resurgence of this newer version of Atlanta for good and bad, but all through that still having some of the trickles of a lot of the racism that we saw and a lot of racism that we felt living in the southern suburbs of Atlanta at that time. And then, of course, the poverty that we started to see as well post the Olympics.
Mhm.
And then also the international, though, community that sort of arose out of the Olympics was also something that was very one of the great things that did happen along the International Village and Buford Highway and having access to international markets, and, more for the foods, culture, languages. So that part is still here and it's growing, and that has been great because that's just what I love. I love cities.
Yeah.
I've studied. But to see all those different components and how sometimes they interact and sometimes how they can be very destructive has all led to where we are now politically and how our city and metro Atlanta area has been developed over time. So the question now really is, with all of that, especially being from here, how does that affect developing, designing communities for people that want to live or kids that want to stay, and what does that look like, and where do people want to live? What does that place look like? And I think that's where Atlanta is right now, specifically as a city. But yeah, very very interesting time from when I was born in '81 to living through all of that till now, and actually coming back to Atlanta and starting a business.
Yeah, well, I want to back up for just a second because, we only got just a little glimpse of you're talking about your grandparents and even your parents and their interactions, their ability to interact with iconic civil rights leaders. They were a part of that movement. It's certainly one of the things Atlanta is known for. It's probably one of our prouder moments.
Yep.
But I am curious if you have any stories to share or any things that you've gleaned from the time that they were actually a part of that movement and being able to interact and being on the front lines of such an important moment in history.
Yeah, so my grandfather was born and grew up in Middle Georgia and Macon,
Okay.
and so this is pre the civil rights. This was
Mhm.
at the very beginnings of Jim Crow, and it was extremely rough. And some of his story. And of course, he grew up with James Brown. From between Augusta and Macon, he also had stories of uh, growing up with Little Richard, and a lot of those musicians down there. He had his own band. Everybody almost probably had their own band at that time before he got drafted
Wow.
later on. But having to grow up in a place where, you know, they couldn't go to swimming pools, so they had to swim what they call swimming holes in the river, to, you know, buying even cigarettes for someone in the neighborhood. And I think the cigarettes, name of the cigarettes was Prince Albert. And so when he would go buy a pack of cigarettes for someone in the community, he'd have to say, I want to buy Mr. Prince Albert. It's just little things like that,
Wow.
that really ridiculous,
Yeah.
but very subtle,
Yeah.
that just sort of chipped away at,
Absolutely.
your integrity.
Yeah.
In the meantime, my grandmother was born here in Southwest Atlanta, in the Pittsburgh community, which is where, you know, my grandmother's side we're all from. And she would tell me stories about, you know, being here in Southwest Atlanta, and her grandfather, who's Irish,
Mm.
uh, the only white man that was in the community.
Mhm.
He and the black men in the community would, every other night, really late, would get their shotguns and put on their boots, and they'd line up in the street because the Klan was coming down the
Wow.
street to ward them off. And so all of that had an impression on her.
Absolutely.
She was it was three sisters. She was the youngest, but she was the most vocal and the most energetic when it came to the start of the civil rights movement. And so she was, you know, someone who, she didn't move from her seat on the bus either.
Mm.
She participated in a lot of sit-ins. She participated in organizing for sit-ins and for
Wow.
marches at Pascal's Restaurant here in Atlanta, and was a huge supporter and advocate for Mayor Maynard Jackson, Herman Russell, and so yeah, really sort of deep into that space. My mom and my aunts, they ended up spending their time in Catholic school here in Atlanta with the Malou family at St. Pius. So if anything might know about politics, you know about Malou family in Georgia. And so they had it's different experience as far as educational component, going to Catholic schools, although my mom was one of the only Black kids at St. Pius at that time, so it wasn't
Okay.
easy either for
Yeah.
her. So learning all of that and being supportive when I came along and was growing up, making sure that I loved who, you know, always had self-love, and making sure that I stood up for what I believed in, and they stood up for me as being grandparents and parents, uncles. That's just something that's embedded in who I am and what we do, especially around these being in service part of it. So growing up, you know, early on, and my parents would take me to soup kitchens to help, prepare food and feed homeless, to volunteering, to going to a lot of libraries where they had conversations around, um, you know, uh, uh, civil rights and the civil rights impact, and how to promote and progress the learnings from the civil rights movement. So that was just a part of
Yeah.
growing up. It wasn't anything that it's another language for
Right.
me, honestly. And then I think also a piece that was really important, at that time, my grandmother was heavy, especially in the 70s. She was involved and just kept learning and educating herself around the new NPU system, neighborhood planning unit system, and how Mayor Maynard Jackson was supporting and helping to create these neighborhood advocacy and neighborhood led associations that supported or very vocalize, their needs and interests to city government, city officials, which was a groundbreaking way, actually nationally from a planning standpoint, of how to engage communities around development, future development, infrastructure, transportation, education, public school systems, and so forth. And one of the key neighborhoods that always fascinated me with her stories of paying attention to all of that and evolution of those NPUs, and how serious people were at that time to create equitable communities, especially after all of the white flight from the city of Atlanta and so forth, was Little Five Points. And so Little Five Points became, as eclectic as it is, has always been really my haven and my safe zone. When I was growing up, going to school, um, in middle school and high school, because that was for me one of the most diverse
Mhm.
and inclusive. If you know Little Five Points, you know what I'm talking about, places to go. So just to see how all of the political aspects were threaded through the actual development and land use of neighborhoods in Atlanta and the Atlanta metro area.
Yeah. Wow. What an incredible legacy to be a part of. How proud you must be. Really remarkable work. And for those of you who may not live here in Atlanta, or maybe you do live here but haven't gone yet, highly encourage you. This reminded me to go to the National Center for Civil Rights. It's
Yes.
incredible. There is also one of the most moving experiences that I've told people about is the lunch counter there, where you sit
Yes.
and you put the headphones on and you hear, you have to remain calm, you have to put your hands on the table, and in your headphones people are yelling at you terrible,
Hmm.
terrible things. And I was just, tears streaming down my face. I mean, I can't, that's a simulated experience. I can't imagine the real thing, and just remarkable. So yeah, no.
Yeah, and in fact, my mom's her very first job, and she was a teenager, was at a Dairy Queen on the west side of town, near the AUC, so Atlanta University Center, Morehouse Spelman, Morris
Mm,
Brown, Atlanta Theological Seminary, and her boss, Mr. Hank Johnson, who owned several restaurants. I just found out recently that he was a freedom rider, and I didn't know that, and
oh
she didn't know
wow.
that. Yeah, from a contact back in Durham, which is where I started my career in North Carolina. But he was one of the original freedom riders, and their bus was bombed. Um, but he's longtime hotelier and restaurateur here in Atlanta, and actually in Middle Georgia as well. But just to be that close
Mhm.
to those courageous individuals, talk about 6 degrees of separation. I mean,
Yeah.
it's at some point you run into someone in Atlanta who, if you stay long enough, who was part of all of that.
Right.
So
Yeah, well, yeah, we've dug deep into Atlanta history here, which I'm loving. Hopefully this encourages more people to visit or to get out and explore their own neighborhood. And I want to touch on something that no matter where somebody is, that you mentioned as well, that I think is so important, which is, you said part of the language growing up was the volunteering and the being able to meet people from different walks of life. For the parents out there, or really involved aunts and uncles, and aunties and uncles, and from grandparents standpoint, getting kids out, being able to show them different walks of life, being able to volunteer and be around other people who maybe they can't imagine those kinds of circumstances, to be homeless or to be that vulnerable. What was that
yeah.
like for you as a kid, that other people can be, take that away from and say, yeah, I need to really get my kids away from a
Hmm.
screen and into an environment like that?
Yeah, it was extremely impactful. Of course, then as a child, in the midst of it, you don't understand all of
Right.
it, which is where your parents come in to
Yeah.
explain as best as they can some of the issues and the challenges that people face. And for me, once, and then I was probably 7 years old when I started, 6 or 7, doing that. And the constant conversation from my grandparents and parents about why these situations exist in a way that I could understand it as best as I could, um, you know, just it helps you to create a level of empathy that is critical if you really want to solve the world's problems, or at least change the rules. Um, to a point where you sympathize, you empathize, and understand as much as you can, and wanting to really make a difference. And kids naturally are like that. They are naturally creative, they're
Curious.
naturally
Mhm.
interested, they're naturally courageous, they're naturally gifted in being empathetic and having a good heart. And that is a perfect time to introduce children to other ways, other lifestyles. And so that they can start to ask questions, and they can start to figure out on their journey, how to solve solutions to real problems, not just symptoms.
Yeah.
But what was interesting when you participate and volunteer, whether it's in soup kitchens, or your church, or other organizations, or start your own
Mhm.
or a small organization as a kid, um, you start seeing people who look like you. You start seeing people who, maybe their kids go to your school and you didn't know that they were homeless.
Mhm.
You start to see people that live in your neighborhood, or people that work with your parents. And it really is about the village and community building. I think we've lost a lot of that because we are so focused on electronics instead of focused on the actual reality
Mm-hmm.
of what people are going through. It's also interesting because it helps you gain a greater perspective as you get older, how close you are to being in that situation,
Yeah.
because of all of the other external environmental factors that you just can't control.
Right.
So it just makes you more of a thoughtful individual. I think it makes you more of a natural leader in the sense of wanting to take the problem by the reins and let's go, let's figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
And it also reminds you that there are good people in the world
Right.
who, share your values and do want to either be a leader with of an organization or of an idea, or support someone else who's doing it. And then I think the last thing is that there's always a need for being in service to
Right.
others. That's critical. And so if we can't continue to be on this individualistic journey and think things are going to work out, we really have to understand the value that we are of being interconnected, because we are. So that interconnectedness is critical in our evolution, as I think, as a human race. And I saw that early on, participating in all of those sorts of meetings, events, soup kitchens, whatever the need was. I was there. But I think that at the end of the day, my parents being there with me was the critical piece, because they
Right.
could then explain, in a way that I would understand it at that
Yeah,
time.
for sure. Yeah, thank you. That's really beautiful. Um, so let's fast forward a few years. I've thoroughly enjoyed learning more about your childhood, but let's get a little bit more into your career as well. So you're
Mhm.
graduated now. What does that look like before starting Maker Studio? And I guess also let me ask,
Sure.
you talked about city planning and drawing with crayons, city, intersections and things like that. That's something I have no frame of reference for. So what was it that drew you to that? How did that come to be? And did you decide, hey, this is something I really want to learn more about and do with my
Mhm.
life?
I honestly don't know where it came from. I started I started doing that around probably third or fourth grade.
Wow.
And I would literally just take over the whole living room floor with crayons and my toy cars and trucks and dump trucks and building blocks, and spend
Wow.
hours on the floor. And the one cool thing about it, my parents never, got irritated or yelled or said, pick up your stuff. They let me figure out whatever I was trying to figure out. Who
Yeah.
knew? I remember my grandmother would say she always wondered what I was thinking. I don't even remember. Um, and
You
we didn't
grow
know
up and think
what it was.
people get paid for this?
Yeah, I had no idea, and didn't know it was a thing. It was just, something that I naturally was
Yeah.
drawn to for some reason. And they just kept encouraging it as I grew older. And so, to fast forward, when I was accepted into Auburn, you typically only hear about architecture. So that's what I started out in, and then quickly realized, and this is with the help of the chair of the program at that time, Jack Williams. There's another type of design, it's called landscape architecture, and fell completely in love with it because it was about that, looking at ecosystems versus a building, looking at the whole
Right.
and understanding how all of the components, from the natural ecology of a site, plant and animal ecology, to the social components, which that really resonated with me, having grown up in Atlanta, and that things are built and designed and developed for a reason.
Mhm.
That people live in poverty for a reason, that public housing looks the way it does for a reason. And then in graduate school, that's when I started the planning program, and didn't know anything about that until then. It was really excited and overlaying the policy piece to the design piece,
Yeah.
and then around real estate development. And I ended up becoming the first African American graduate in the history of Auburn from
Wow.
those programs. Didn't know that either.
Yeah.
What was weird though was the building was named after George Wallace, and anybody that knows who that is, if you Google George Wallace, that's a huge stain on the history of the United States, especially of education. And so, you know, to be in a building where that's named after someone that says segregation forever,
Mhm.
was difficult.
Mhm.
But I persisted, right? We made it out. And so with those degrees, I started out in the natural trajectory of working for private firms in North Carolina. That was where I started my career. And it wasn't until um, I started working, I was laid off during a recession, '08, like a lot of people. And well, actually, let me back up. The firm I was working for before the recession was an awesome firm because that was my first, my first uh, opportunity to work with a bunch of different other types of disciplines.
Mhm.
So everyone from electrical engineering to architecture to interior architecture to, of course, LA and planning to HVAC, plumbing engineers. And I've always had a love and a knack for multidisciplinary approach to solving problems. And so that was really cool to be able to work with
Yeah.
all sorts of different disciplines and how they see the world. And then with the recession, I ended up working for another firm. I met my husband at that firm, who's also a landscape architect, and then ended up working for the city of Durham, North Carolina. And that was a huge difference
Yeah.
and made a big impact on my life working in the public sector. Government is not the most innovative space, but it is a great space to learn the hard way, unfortunately, what
Mhm.
happens when you do try to be creative in a space that's not built for that, but you also learn how the systems work and don't
Yeah.
work and why. And so being able to learn certain key elements of governance was critical in the work that we're doing now because I can translate, what the requirements are to build something or to advocate for something in a way that the recipients of these decisions can then say, no, that's not going to work for us. Oh, now we understand why things are the way they are. Let's revisit and let's change the way, this is working. It's not working for the majority of us.
Yeah.
So that was a very difficult but interesting and challenging environment to work for. And I resigned in 2016. My husband and I moved here to Atlanta. My husband's actually from South Dakota. And of course, just like you mentioned earlier, Kristi, most people don't know about except for the airport. And so
Yeah.
this was a huge surprise. Once I started taking them around the different neighborhoods, so
Yeah.
excited about the city. And we moved back here to Atlanta. And that's when we started Maker Studio in 2017. And we've been going from there ever since.
Yeah, well, and going is definitely the word to use. You are always going, always doing something so interesting. And now I think, I'm excited to tell everybody more, for you to tell everybody more about Maker Studio, because now knowing a little bit more of your background, I think it's such an interesting juxtaposition and a way to continue your family's legacy in a way that I'm sure they would have never imagined. It wasn't a linear path for sure.
Not at all.
But it's a really interesting way to continue that work from a completely different angle. So share more about what Maker Studio is, why you decided to start it, and just tell us a little bit about the mission behind it.
Sure. So Maker Studio, we are a design build remanufacturing company. We specialize in modular real estate and using recycled renewable materials to provide affordable, energy efficient housing. We hope to attain net zero housing
Mhm.
in the future.
Wow.
So there is the intersection of course, designing of spaces to prepare for the real estate solutions that we build. So that is, of course, obviously, it kind of touches on landscape architecture and site development and planning, well, site development piece. Then there is the whole hard, deep conversation around affordable housing and what does that mean, the different types of affordable housing. So now you're talking about community engagement, civic engagement, advocacy, NIMBY's not in my backyard, and yes, in my backyard, and opportunities to advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves for whatever reason, to be able to build housing for these individuals who need to be able to live, work, and play in the same space. And then, of course, there's the intersection of job creation and manufacturing and bringing jobs back to our communities here in the United States and being able to source local materials to build sustainable and structurally sound housing, which then leads to the intersection of the actual construction part of it and the sustainability piece of it, which we have just started really promoting our company as being more in the climate tech scene than before. We hadn't really thought about it in that way. So that has propelled us into a lot of more interesting and new conversations around how to scale and who to build for. So all of this came out of all of the past experience that I mentioned few minutes ago, from growing up in a space that was heavily involved in a civil rights movement, a family heavily involved in civil rights movement. Atlanta was the foundation for that for many of us. And then seeing to go from this amazing social space to people being displaced and impoverished and lack of housing, to living around an international community, within an international community, to then learning how to design spaces for all kind of culminated into how do we materialize that into physical spaces versus just some pie in the sky idea, spaces that we can actually feel, touch, put on the ground, and scale, because the affordable housing crisis is a global crisis. And how do we make money doing it? Because you really need to be able to make money to solve a problem.
Yeah.
So we created a for-profit. Basically, we're seen as a social enterprise because we are making money for good, right? The whole idea is to solve global problems around both housing, workforce, and poverty and sustainability and clean tech. And so we started what we are still doing now. We take shipping containers and we retrofit them because it's a material that's abundant. We don't export that much in the United States, especially during and after the pandemic.
Right.
Well, of course, we're kind of still in the pandemic, but post-pandemic. And the idea of reusing material that's abundant in an urban landscape and retrofitting this material for a better, higher quality use that's readily available, that's affordable to build, so therefore affordable to provide to those that need affordable housing and to those that might be able to purchase from us in bulk to build affordable housing, but small spaces for large impact. So these spaces can fit in tight urban lots where the land costs are so extremely high and construction costs are so high it can't justify doing that. Well, we can, because we build in smaller spaces and we can stack these. So the idea of creating or being creative around materials, being creative around reuse and recycling, sustainability, being creative around what can we do to boost affordability and do it in a way that's not conventional, that doesn't require tax credits, that can be built locally and create more jobs by hiring local tradesmen and women and veterans and other women to join us in the construction industry and build all of our real estate offsite in a factory. So we just acquired a 29,000 square foot factory in East Point, right outside of the city of Atlanta. We're still waiting to move in. It's a building that's under renovation. We are leasing it, but that would allow us to build multiple units of housing at once very quickly through a standardized permitting process. So again, for us, the question was, how do we solve a problem or build a new system or a new way of thinking, or change the rules around the built environment and do it in a way that's both quality but also efficient to start solving the problem quickly. We don't have that much time. So that's what we do now, and that's what we will continue to do. We are working on some new product development, though, to make us more efficient even in that approach.
Wow. Let's jump back to, I want to talk for a second about the manufacturing aspect, because this is one thing that you brought up a few months ago when I heard you speak at an event and we were finally able to meet for the first time in person. But you were talking about just manufacturing, what that meant locally, the job creation from that, and kind of the broken system that it currently exists around it and what it could be. Can you expand on that a little bit more and talk kind of reiterate some of those points, which I'm not eloquent, I'm not stating well at all, but you'll do an amazing job with.
No, I mean, no, good question, Kristi, and thanks for asking that. So I love to talk about it. I mean, it's really for us to stand back at a higher level and look at how can we democratize the supply chain. We've recently all seen just how sensitive our supply chains are during the pandemic. And we need to be able to produce and make and build locally. We also need to be able to teach and train tradesmen and women and those individuals in the communities that want to build the change they want to see in these skills so that they can build their own generational wealth, not just living it, but literally building it and facilitating, equitable opportunities, because everything starts at home, right? And so it's not just about the actual structure, it's also about the ability to have access not just to materials and supply chain, but also just the community services that you need, schools, education, healthcare, the library, everything, grocery stores, access to healthy foods, locally grown foods, another conversation, but still all part of this local supply chain conversation that we've been having internally. And so how do we fit in with that? How do we support that? And it really is about, again, multidisciplinary approach and collaborating and communicating with local community colleges and trades organizations and youth early on, to show them other opportunities that you can't. First of all, why are you living the way you live, and how do we support you in living better so that you can leave a better legacy? But that means you have to be able to participate in the actual construction, physical construction, physical building of your community. And I remember growing up here in Atlanta, passing the Herman Russell building, Northside Drive, and wanting to be Herman Russell. Like, that's what I want to be when I grow up. Someone that literally shapes the built environment so that but shapes it for all versus just a few. But in order to do that, we need to really urban onshore and bring jobs back to our communities, and learn how to make again, learn how to build again, hence the name of our company, Mākhers. So being able to take, at least to start out, taking a material like a shipping container that was unfortunately built somewhere else, but understanding the component parts and how the science of the material and how it works in the environment, exploding those parts, understanding how all the pieces fit together and retrofitting it for a bigger and better use could potentially, and we think, at least for us, it is impacting how we, excuse me, how we build better and how we do better. So it's all about being able to reimagine what you have where you are for a bigger and better use so that it can create generational wealth, it can create equity, it can bring, it can promote diversity and inclusion, and you can make money doing it. You can have the resources and the capital to do it. So for me, my obligation as CEO of Maker Studio isn't really to grow, exponentially very quickly, 20, 30 times, which normally you hear about in investor conversations. It really is about, the obligation really is about small impact, small steps for larger impact that you can build and manufacture locally, scale that sustainably and smartly, in collaboration with other solutions out there, but at least to be part of the solution versus part of the problem. Right. So that is, for me, the excitement around our company transitioning from just recycling a material to actually manufacturing new products in the near future.
Yeah, that is exciting. Congratulations on the new space. Our team will be excited to come tour it one day when it's ready.
Yeah, can't wait. Hopefully mid-October we'll be in.
Okay. All right. Well, we talked about the making and the manufacturing. Let's talk about some of the spaces and places. So everybody listening to this podcast is very, very, very intimately familiar with a shipping container. And the interesting thing was, a few weeks ago, our team went down to near the Atlanta airport to tour the Dignity Museum, which is a homeless museum inside a shipping container. To raise awareness about that issues. And I think it was one of those moments for our team that also redefined what a shipping container could be. And so that's, I know, one thing that you're working on as well. So talk about some of the places, some of your favorite projects, and what a shipping container has started as and then become during the process.
Yeah, it's really exciting work because it is different. It does sort of question what can be a material that you can use successfully and get it permitted for a place to live in. We get those questions all the time, but it's also not difficult. It's not that complicated. It's something that helps to democratize that access to building your own housing or even commercial spaces. In fact, when we started Maker Studio, our first projects to market have been a mixture of residential and commercial. This year, as a team internally, we have just decided that our focus is really going to be, we're working on a commercial project right now. It's a shipping container kitchen, or commercial kitchen, incubator kitchen. But after this, our focus is going to be housing and residential, new construction, as well as retrofits using our shipping container spaces, as well as other prefab advanced materials that we are going to start producing soon, because the need is so great.
Right.
But our favorite one I think to date is the one that you see behind me, which is was our first residential unit. It's our first ADU accessory dwelling unit, backyard unit in Old Fourth Ward,
Mm.
and that one was exciting for a lot of reasons. One, you know, conventional construction is difficult in the sense that you can't really, because of the cost of land, especially in communities like Old Fourth Ward that have completely gentrified. You're talking about vacant land lots going for $600,000 easily, where you can't justify using conventional methods affordable housing, but using modular methods to build shipping container is one type of modular construction where you're building offsite in a factory and develop and deploying it to the site. You can, those costs make sense. Interestingly, though, we didn't have a manufacturing site at that time, so we actually had to build that particular unit on site. That was interesting to be able to fit a 40-foot long container down an alley in a very tight lot was an interesting experience. But our clients believed in the married couple that we built their backyard unit for. They believed in us, and that's all it took. That's really all it takes. It's just one person or two to champion what you're doing, because the educational component was difficult. What should have taken us, a week, 2-week build and installation took us, you're talking about 12 months, 18 months because of the permitting, City of Atlanta permitting that was so difficult. People didn't understand what we were doing. We didn't fit the typical checklist of how we build. We had even in the Office of Zoning, they were like, well, we can't even intake this project because you don't have enough pages in your plans, right? It's too small of a project. Like, what does that even mean?
Wow.
And so we were, from building supervisors saying, well, this is a dangerous house because it can be picked up by a tornado and blown away. Just the most ridiculous, some of the most ridiculous responses. And that's what we had to fight. We had to really educate those that were in charge of approving the opportunity for affordability.
Mhm.
And that continues to be a fight. However, we had always planned on what we're doing now, which is going through the certification to be able to standardize how we build so that we don't have to go through building permitting. We can just build it in our factory and be on our way and install it. But that process of, even though it was difficult, it's always the best education for a company to be in a team to be able to understand how all the pieces fit together to practically do it versus just talking about it in the classroom or around a table. And so we were able to bring this project to life and build our first energy efficient 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom unit, 320 square foot unit for a $55,000, $60,000 budget. You're just not going to find a 1-bedroom unit in a downtown for that amount of money. And energy efficient. And we ran some calculations with our energy partners in Raleigh, Southern Energy Management, and we realized that anyone living in this space would have energy bill of less than $50 a month.
Wow.
And so that's when we really start thinking about the energy
Yeah.
efficiency of what we build and how we build in the future. So that was our favorite, probably our favorite project,
Yeah.
just because it checked off so many of the things that we
Absolutely.
feel so passionately about and what we're going to be doing in the future. And able to give tours, although I told the clients that we now have a space, we won't be touring in our backyard too often anymore. But we've been able to give tours to the City of Atlanta public officials so they can see and walk and understand and walk through what this space looks like. And it always just blows people away how spacious it is, how quiet it is, and how it fits within the existing urban context. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited
And it's
about that project. We love it. And our clients love it. That really means a lot to us.
yeah.
Yeah.
And can you also talk about, of course, at the time of this recording, the hurricane has just gone through Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
They're being hammered again. Our team is working on Ukraine efforts. There's every day it feels like another disaster. Will you also talk about, I think they're called med pods?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So we did a quick iteration with one of our shipping containers in partnership with a local breast cancer physician here in Atlanta on how to quickly retrofit one of our units as a medical clinic. And so we took the very first container that we ever built in 2017, and we built that kind of as like our office, but also a marketing tool. And we were able to in a day, turn that into basically a modular, temporary, maybe permanent, semi-permanent medical clinic right in the middle of our neighborhood here in West End. And we were able to have, all of the physician, Dr. Spencer, she brought over her equipment, medical beds, everything that you needed to be able to support women in, an urban environment to test and look for breast cancer, to support any women, and men as well, if they have those needs. But it showed just the viability and also the versatility of small spaces that we could quickly retrofit for not just housing, but also services in the community that are so needed and often, not available, as we just saw here in Atlanta with the closure, soon to be closure of the Atlanta Hospital Medical Center in Old Fourth Ward. And so reimagining space and backyards and parking lots and subway parking lots, transit areas, transit-oriented development, reimagining that not as these big apartments, but as these small spaces that actually could serve critical services and needs for the community, and to be built quickly and built, with less material, less carbon footprint, and also, but built with the people from the community so that they have jobs to be able to support the housing that we call affordable.
Yeah.
I will say though, one of the last major hurricanes that we had, I believe that was 2018, in the Caribbean, we were channel surfing and saw on CNN they had they were showing this view of all the destruction from the hurricane. All the houses were totally destroyed, and all of a sudden you see container just sitting there. Nothing happened to it. Nothing, there was no damage. Those were the only structures that were still standing. And I said, see, that is how we have to think about the future of our environment as climate change gets worse and the crisis gets worse. Although we're, starting to create more solutions, but it's a big target. We have to think about the safety and the health of our structures, especially around housing. And that reminded me of even the housing that I've lived in the past. And we live next door to an apartment building that's in terrible shape. And, health and housing are very interrelated. And so how do we look at advanced materials and materials for how we built the environment in a way that supports lower asthma rates, supports, the safety, lower energy costs and cooling costs, not just for the external environment, but for the people that live in it. So all of this started with a shipping container, and we've expanded the conversation since then.
Yeah, it's incredible. Even whenever you were talking about the kitchen and you mentioned food insecurity later, I also thought, it's just a great, could even be a portable kitchen or a portable grocery store into a food desert. It can be moved in and out of those places and, taken.
Yeah, we've been talking, we've gotten a lot of people contacting us, and we're working with the community in Michigan now. On this as well, for the vertical farms and using containers for vertical farming to provide year-round food for those communities that don't have access to healthy foods. One example was the shooting in Buffalo, New York. And what people didn't realize was that was the only grocery store that the community had. So after everyone was, after the terrible murders of those innocent individuals at the grocery store, that grocery store was closed for a long period of time because of the investigation. So now there's no food, right? And so to be able to supply, again, it goes back to local supply chains, supporting local farmers, urban farmers, and providing the actual spaces for those farmers to be able to sell and provide healthy foods in communities. Classrooms, when the pandemic hit and schools were closed, we started getting calls about that. How can we, is there a way that our foundation can partner with you to provide temporary classroom spaces? And we even had a conversation with Walmart Foundation in Michigan about looking at providing classrooms in our shipping containers, literally on site at Walmart, so that parents who are working in Walmart can be close to their kids while the teachers were teaching there at Walmart. And now we're getting calls from the cannabis industry about building for medicinal cannabis purposes, building containers for that. I will say though, that's the other reason why we are focusing from a business model on a use, which is housing, because it can go so many different ways. It's hard to operationalize that. But I will say have been talking to some critical partners who are utilizing shipping containers for really interesting clean technologies from wastewater management to battery storage for renewable energy. So
Okay.
every day, I'm just totally inspired and excited about the opportunity to support, not just provide the infrastructure for what we want to do, but support other technologies who are interested, and those companies interested in creating equitable communities.
Right. That's incredible. I'm excited to see everything that comes next, because there's certainly no shortage of ideas. And the
Yep.
great thing is we turn on the news and we hear lots of bad things all the time, but conversations like this and the conversations you have every day remind you there's also a lot of people willing to get in there and
A
jump in.
lot. Yeah, it's a lot. And I tell you what, there's two myths. One, that there's not enough, there's not enough resources to go around, and that's not true, especially if we democratize those local supply chains. It's just, again, it's reimagining what's around you and how to creatively combat problems with what you have where you are. And the other myth is that there's only enough space for a few people to solve the problem. That's not true. We need everybody. You don't have to build shipping containers. That's just what we do. But we need all the solutions, because these are big problems, and these are real problems. I just drove by somebody who was evicted not too long ago, and all of their belongings were out in the street. All of the belongings that people invest in. Let's invest in what we do. That's actually building affordable housing so that we don't have people evicted. So there's that. You're right, Kristi. I mean, that is the inspiring piece, because we're always bombarded with such negativity. There are so many people doing amazing work in the built environment and infrastructure, clean tech, you name it, logistics. That's what keeps us so excited about the work.
That's incredible. And to speak for a second about some of those challenges, clearly you're doing amazing things, but I'm sure it hasn't always been an easy, smooth road.
No.
Especially in a global pandemic.
Yep.
So what are a couple of the challenges that you and Maker Studio have faced? And it could be about launching the business, or particular projects, or supply chain, or transportation, or something like that. What are a couple of those challenges, and how have you found the creativity to solve them?
So everything you said, all of the above.
Check all of the above. Yes.
Yeah, check all of the above. Yeah, starting a business is not easy.
No.
It's not for the faint of heart. Raising money for something that most people don't understand is not easy, and not for the faint of heart. Especially when you are working in the construction industry, which is white male dominated, and even more challenging, the modular construction industry, which is even a smaller piece of the larger construction industry. And the difficult piece about that, for all modular businesses, really, is that disrupting the idea of what construction is. So that's just challenging for all of us in this space. But I do see that as a growing trend. Also, being a Black woman owned business in construction is difficult, especially when people see you on construction sites. You're not always taken seriously, and sometimes we've had costs of materials just coincidentally go up once I get on site. And so that has been frustrating and challenging. Also, like I mentioned before, the permitting, education around modular construction. Cities are just not built for that. The building and permitting offices inspections are not built for that. And that has cost us a lot of time and money just to even get past being able to get approvals to be the first. And to get our products to market is just difficult. Anytime you're the first in anything, it's difficult, because you're setting a new standard. But that has pushed us to figure out how can we be more efficient, so that we can change these challenges into productive elements of providing affordable housing and equitable development. One of the things that I learned about working in the city when I worked for city government is that some systems you just can't change. And so you have to work outside of it and think creatively around how to create a new one. And so that's really the approach that we've taken. We don't have that much time to keep fighting certain elements. We need to be able to, but we need to be able to have a safe space to experiment and explore and align ourselves with those individuals who believe in what we believe in, which was why we were so excited about raising our first pre-seed round last year to be able to get the manufacturing space that we have now. And so now we're at a point, though, where all of those challenges have culminated into figuring out how to sustain the company and continue to grow and innovate and build for more people. And so having the space and latitude to do that and having products that we can show that we've built, that's a critical piece, showing that we've built something and it's approved and permitted is really helping us to move farther along. I will say the other challenge, though, is just like a lot of companies, especially woman-owned companies, that are, well, when I have to pitch, I don't run this company like a typical construction company where you're bidding. We are trying to be as self-sustaining as possible. And so I'm like a tech company. So I'm pitching and trying to raise investment, equity investment, impact investment, different types of investment out there. And we've come up against a lot of other companies in our space who never really haven't built that much, but they've been able to raise tens of millions of dollars because they know someone or they went to this college and I didn't, and Ivy League. So those are some of the challenges, but we continue to move forward and continue to find, as we peel back the layers, those investors and funders, advocates and champions who really are really interested in helping us to solve the problem.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned a second ago trends. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in the industry that you're really excited about?
Yeah, so so a couple of things. One, just modular in general.
Yeah.
The need for modular. I think we're starting to turn the tide on people paying close attention to the others in the construction industry paying attention to the modular industry, but I think more is coming from just the need to solve these problems. And so people are like, the cities are like, we can't keep doing it this way. Conventional construction isn't working.
Out of space, yeah.
Well, and the conventional construction way of funding, development, tax credit, the world is just difficult. And then of course, supply chain with materials, it's so volatile, and having a factory and building offsite helps to solve that problem a lot. And of course, you have better quality control. But then the other trend is building for better, clean, as a better, clean way to provide, whether you're building for commercial spaces or residential. And so being just more equipped in looking at advanced materials, renewable materials, mass timber, and building and urban infill opportunities. These are really the trends because our cities are growing. I mean, our population as far as cities are expected to double in 2050, by 2050. And so we really have to start solving these problems quite quickly. And the best way to do it, in our opinion, and what we are seeing is the modular industry. Now, we've seen hospitality industry take advantage. Hotels are starting to utilize modular construction to quickly build their developments, and that way you can start getting your rents and payments quicker. And so, yeah, I think the shift is happening. It's happening because we kind of want it to happen. It's because it's happening because we need it to happen, and it's just going to happen regardless. And so we're being forced to rethink our models of infrastructure, providing equitable spaces for as many people as possible. I mentioned that earlier, that it's no longer just a complete 90% Black and Brown conversation now, or Indigenous conversation. This is an everyone conversation. It's affecting everybody. People who are graduating from college, they can afford a home. Right. And so, to be able to continue the idea of this so-called American dream, figure out what that looks like for a more inclusive group of people, to being able to make choices about how you want to live and where you want to live. And also, to build communities where kids don't have to leave because they don't have opportunities. These are the questions that we're having to answer now. And luckily for us, the built environment was different from talking about electric vehicles and that infrastructure. Buildings really are a low-hanging fruit. And so what we have to do, and part of what has been challenging for us, is to sell that and tell that story. Because you tend to see more funding and investment opportunities going to the electric development, and that's great and that's important as well. But buildings, we touch buildings, we interact with buildings every day, and so the construction industry is the second, I believe, second most carbon emissive industry around the globe, but we're the least invested in. And so we're starting to finally see some trending up of people and organizations and institutions and philanthropic foundations starting to invest in what they call construction tech and work that we are doing. So really excited. I think we're in the beginning phase of that, but it's always great. Not always great. It's difficult, but it is great to be at the beginning to set the tone for what we think we need to see more of in the future. And so we are proud to be at that position.
Yeah, for sure. And as we start to wrap up here a little bit, I want to look a little bit more into the future as you are
Yes.
someone who looks at the whole, not just the pieces, as you're at the critical intersection of people and places and cultures and social issues. What is your hope for the future of your industry?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Well, the hope for me is that I can inspire especially the construction industry, but all industries, at a certain point to be more multidisciplinary, to understand that we really need to be able to, the only way to solve problems is to have not only a socially diverse and inclusive roundtable, but within that roundtable, scientists, policymakers, social scientists, mathematicians, teachers, those that utilize the spaces that we build have to be the front voices while the rest of us are behind building the change versus those of us building the change being at the forefront. We really need to be able to build for solutions for people who are going to be impacted by the effects of how we build in the future. So more of a multidisciplinary approach from a business standpoint, operation standpoint. The future for Maker Studio really is about getting more into bio-inspired materials.
Okay.
And advanced materials and figuring out how to build better. Like you can always do better, but build with the natural ecology in mind. And that kind of comes from the landscape architectural background for me. And just being more building buildings that are more responsive. I call it prosilience instead of resilience. So proactively engaging our residents and our refugee populations,
Yep.
and having those individuals lead the charge about how we should build versus the other way around.
Mhm.
And so more engagement has to be needed. More empathy has to be needed for what we're doing, and more of an understanding of the interconnectedness of why we should solve these problems and how. And that's what I think. That's how I think. For me, that's what I see the future as being. I hope so. If we really need to be able to evolve equitably as the human race and as entrepreneurs, so we're all about solving problems. It's just making sure that they are led by those that we solve for versus the other way around.
For sure. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. That's an exciting future that lies ahead that will continue to build together those of us who are ready to solve these problems.
Yes.
And then finally, just as a woman, as a person of color who is still in spaces where people don't look like you didn't have a lot of mentors go before you. What would you say to other potential entrepreneurs who are wanting to advance their careers in spaces where they may not have a lot of role models or may not look around and see other people that look like them? It's a tough road. It's a challenging road. You've pushed through a lot of adversity on your way. So what advice would you give them as no matter where they're in their journey on their career?
Well, the first thing is, and I've told some other young kids this before when I did some volunteer teaching, that number one, it is okay to not be happy with where you are in your situation, because for the most part, it was planned that way. But now that you know that, what are you going to do about it? And a lot of the onus is on us as being the adults in the room, to help inspire and show the various opportunities that there are to making money, to living a healthy lifestyle, but how to do that in service to others, and to really embrace your differences. I embrace the fact that I look the way I do and I have blue hair because that's just who I am. But it also, I think, at least my feedback has been that it inspires other young girls and young boys to do the same. And that you really literally can create your own lane. I was told that when I worked for the city, and I took it as a negative comment because it was supposed to be a negative comment, but then I've learned to say, you know what, that is a great thing to build your own lane, but to build it with respect to others. And again, going back to the interconnectedness. And so that for me, that's really what it's about. The obligation there again isn't how quickly you can do something, but the quality of how you can build it and inspire others to be able to have access to build their own change, to be able to teach kids how to build their own homes with recycled material, with materials around them right outside, how to grow their own food with a couple of seeds. That's survival, but it's also groundbreaking. It's game changing to have that much purpose and power right here at your fingertips. And then how do you use that and how do you leverage that for good and scale it and make a viable company out of it? How can we promote more entrepreneurs to solve problems? And again, to focus on that there's enough room for everybody. It's all about access. And once you understand that, people get excited. Like, wow, I can actually make it. Yeah, you can. And it doesn't have to be something that's so big. I think a lot of times we are fed that these problems are so big, which they are, and it makes you feel like you can't do anything about them, but you can, little steps for big impact. So, that has been just a continuous push and reminder that people pushed for me to be able to do what I'm doing and to sit where I sit. And that obligation has to continue. Also knowing that there aren't a lot of people that look like me in this space. I wish there were, because I've had to go through a lot of challenges that have been a waste of money and time, and I wouldn't want that for somebody else. So that really invigorates me. I've been told to take time out sometimes to really look and meditate on how much we have accomplished with what little we've had. And when you do that, you get reminder that you are needed. We are needed for what we're doing, and that we're all needed to make a difference. Just be as creative about it as you can, and innovative about it. And that it's okay to have a different perspective, because that perspective is needed. That's how we approach the question about inspiring. I don't like the use of the term empowering. I think we have our own power, but to inspire others to use their own power for good is what we are all about. We just happen to use design and construction to do that. So.
Yes. Well, hopefully, like Herman Russell, one day in the future, you will have your own innovation center.
Yeah, that'd be great. That's right.
Inspiring more generations. But
Yeah.
so how can people, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. I'm an even bigger fan of you than when I started earlier. How can our listeners connect with you and support Mākhers Studio?
Yeah, well, again, Kristi, thanks for inviting me to this podcast. This helps share our story, so we really appreciate it. But for those interested in learning more about Mākhers Studio, feel free to visit us on our website, makerstudio.com.
Which is Makhers.
Yes. It looks like Mākhers, but it's Mākhers. Or they can visit us on other social media sites. So Instagram at Mākhers Studio, Twitter at Mākhers Studio, and of course LinkedIn. Or they can find me, my LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram at Wajisa, Wajisa. Those are my initials. You can find me there as well. And feel free to email us via the website email address form that you can fill out there, and we will respond as quickly as we can. And just keep an eye out for us. We're always posting. We're trying to keep up with that. And watch our growth. We are also soon will be resending out. It's been a long time. I've been really busy, but getting back to our newsletter and sending that out. And so there's a way to sign up for that as well on our website.
Well, and finally, what is your greatest need at the moment? How can people help? What is your action step that you would like listeners to take?
Yeah. Of course, as a company, we're always investing, raising money for investors and funders. So if you're interested in investing and learning more about how to do that, again, feel free to contact us via our website or my email. And of course, the company's email too, which I did not say. It's build for good at makerstudio.com, or my name, Wanona Satcher, at makerstudio.com. In addition to fundraising, just help in sharing our story and sharing this podcast to others who are either, in real estate and construction, clean tech, or those that need access to housing. One of the challenges we have had, I forgot to mention this, we could use some help with finding those individuals who work for or lead community financial institutions or who are VPs of banking institutions who will want to partner with us to underwrite the buildings that we manufacture because they're not conventional. So it's difficult for those who want us to build for them to find the financing to build it because banks aren't used to underwriting shipping container homes or modular homes. So we're actively looking for partners in the financial sector that might be interested in working with us to create some really great real estate solutions, financing, and solutions for those that want to be able to purchase our pods.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. This has been an incredible
Thanks, Kristi.
conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Hopefully, I'm sure our listeners will too. And thank you just so much for advancing conversations and just looking out for how we can be better as a whole and how we can create a better world for us all. So thanks for the terrific work that you and your team do.
Well, thanks, Kristi. Same to you and your team. Again, thanks for sharing our story as well as other stories. That's a critical piece of the puzzle. And again, glad to see you again and reconnect and finally had the opportunity to do a session. So looking forward to more.
Thanks. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for listening in.